So starting with Stephen Barley's article, Technology as an Occasion for Structuring, this paper looks into the CT scanners introduction in two hospitals, suburban and urban community hospitals, and look into the social order of radiology departments. So this paper uh, is mainly used. This paper looks into how the social action and social forms shapes organizational structures in in the in the introduction of technology. So initially, structures uh, is looked as something that denotes abstract formal relation that constrains day-to-day action in social settings. So some researchers advocates that structures as pattern actions and then interactions, behaviors, and cognition. Most structural changes arises as a product and a constraint of human endeavor, and and that technology and structural relationships are orderly and relations hold regardless of context. These were the initial views of structures and structures relation uh, relationship with technology. So in this case, they look into the negotiated order theory and the structuration theory, where the negotiated order theory derives from symbolic interactionism and takes it as a point of departure of its everyday life. Um, but in structuration theory, it attempts to approach functionalist and phenomenological notion of social orders in the level of social theory. So in structuration theory, they look more in to the relationship of technology and structuring as dynamic, and Giddens also talks about the duality of structures where action is constituted by or constituted of social organizations. So going into the sequential mode of structuring, uh, they talk about how structuring uh, has a cumulative effect, and each temporal phases is an accumulation of the previous and the emerged script. Each temporal phases has consists of cumulated scripts, and each temporal phases is an accumulation of the previous temporal phase or and a modification of that. So the sequential model of structure that guides analysis is such that the scripts are outlines of the recurring patterns of interaction that defines in observable and behavioral terms the essence of action roles. So in this figure, we see that the realm of action and the institutional realms are parallel, and such that the social practices constitutes institutions synchronically. So the social actions uh, has an affects the institution realm directly, and the institutional constraints on action is more diagonal. And here the scripts link institutional and action realms. So the study looks into urban and suburban community hospitals that received CT scanners in 1982, and the observation started around June 1982. Each of the hospitals employed 6 radiologists, 50 individuals, and they performed standard range of radiological procedures, bought identical machines called Technicare, and the researchers they observed the adoption of radiological practices and determined the extent of institutional patterns modification, if there is. And some of the ways that they collected data were interviewing, observation of interactions, and the occurrence and timing recorded chronologically. So the analysis was done through three uh, phases. In first, the identification of breakpoints. Second, the recursive scrutiny of the interaction between radiologists and the technologies. And then the third is linking scripted parameters of two interaction order to properties of each area's formal structure. So this study adopted centralization, where the centralization measures are used to aid in the examination of links between two interaction orders and the radiology's fundamental institutions. So the ways of measuring centralization was coded according to the routine's decision making, where it has been coded according to when the new patient started, when scanning started, how far the scan, techniques used, reposition of the patient, and etc. And then to the end of the exam. So looking into the suburban CD operation, the studies show that the suburban CD operations occurred in two phases. The structuring occurred in two phases, and in urbans it occurred in four phases. So for suburbans, they found out that in phase one there was negotiation of discretion, where initially the radiologists and the technologies were trying to clarify each of their roles, and this is because most of their employees, the radiologist employees, were newly graduated or newly certified people, and they only employed two experienced technologies and some experienced technologies. So in the first phases, they went through the negotiation of discretion and then the unsorted validation, where the radiologists would not seek information or reaction from the technologies, and then the anticipatory questions, where there will be a direct question asked to the technologies by the radiologists, and there will be a direct answer from the technologies, but then there's additional questions of questioning of what to do or what steps to take next to the technologies, which caused some frustration in the technologies, as they felt that the radiologists should know their work and should be doing their job of interpreting the images instead of asking the opinions of their technologies to interpret it. So in the second phase, they found out that there was an unserving autonomy, where the technologies figured out that they had more experience in the field, that they started adopting Candlestein teaching, where they were explaining things to the radiologists since they were new, but then it without the intention of teaching them, but they ended up teaching them passively. And then there was a role reversal, as the technologists knew more than the radiologists, so the authority of the decision making reversed to the technologies. And at the end of the experiments, sometimes when there is a mistake, since the radiologists would take the advice of the technologists, the blaming also went to the technologists. And in the urban city operations, we see that there were four phases. In the first phase, there was negotiating dependencies, where in the first phase, we see that most of the authority and the controls and comments were carried out by the radiologists, because in the urban hospital they had more experienced radiologists. So the direction given by the radiologists to the technologies, the countermands where they would um, counter their previous comments by asking them to uh, change the whole process of CD scanning, and then the usurping the controls, uh, and also the um, usurping of control. So the first three points here shows that a lot of the authority goes to the radiologists, and this also had a impact or effect on the technologies where their uh, their confidence in the field decreases. So there was uh, an eventual ending of um, the technologies asking for directions and for the comments of the radiologists, since the relationship has been such that the radiologists have been taking control in the commons. But in phase 2 and 3, we see that there is constructing and ensuring inaptitude, where unexpected criticism started arising from the radiologists, since there is increase in the frequency of question asking, and then confirmation of uh, comments and uh, and standards and procedures to be carried out, and then the accusatory question where um, they do they um, unintentionally criticize and their criticize their abilities in their work. So, but then in the phase 4, we see that they evolve towards independence, uh, as technical consultation in technical consultation, where new employees, radiologists, were um, introduced into it, and they were phased they were cycled each week between experienced and inexperienced radiologists. And so there is this mutual execution of work, and there's technical consultation between the technologists who have gained experience, and then the new employed radiologists. Uh, this frequency table shows that the suburban and the urban uh, frequency in the scripts. So the unsorted validation, UV, AQ, PS, CT, and so on are the scripts in each phase. And we see that the frequency of the unsorted validation, anticipatory questions, preference stating in suburban decreased as it moved to phase 2. And for the urban, we see that there is a lot of direction giving, which decreased as time went by, but then it increased in phase 3. As phase 3, there was a lot of unexpected criticism and accusatory question, where the experienced radiologists felt the need to take more command and control, and more direction giving as well. So in the end, this two graphs shows that that the suburban phase 1 and phase 2 has more of a declining trend than urban. And this graph shows the decision made by the radiologists. So in suburban, we see that the radiologists' decision making in phase 1 was higher, but as time went by, it went down. But in urban, we see that most of the decision in phase 1 were high, and then in phase 2 it went down, but then phase 3 it went up again, and then phase 4 it stayed uh, average. So it's quite decentralized. So in order to see if the scripts do have if each phases can be used to describe the structural changes, they did a regression analysis, and for uh, the for table 1 we see that they adopted the quadratic and the linear method, and this the structuring progressions from day to day, we see that the quadratic method prediction is higher than the linear method. So this shows that there's a structuring progression. For table 2, we see that this table 2 is used for centralization scores support determination, and then to see if there is a structuring progression as well to confirm it. So they coded the phases with dummy variables and model for each hospital, and then the combine of the phases. And the regression analysis shows that the combined model did not increase significantly or substantially in variance from the model. So this shows a consistent result that there were 2 phases in suburban hospitals and 4 phases in urban hospital.